Hello everyone, and welcome to more coverage of Grand Prix Rome. I'm that damn Pipsqueak, and I'm bringing you here round 3. We have I has Pinecone on Red Black Burn versus Admiral Ivy on Grixis Control. Um, it looks like Pinecone is on the play and has a hand that is kind of creature reliant, actually. It does have 2 burn spells, which is, great, but being utilizing creatures is really scary against the Exient deck. Um, it's possible Ivy will get a little bit greedy with passing turn with his Exient. Nope, looks like we're going to see the correct amount of patience, which is none, and we're just going to immediately get a Exient on turn 1 into maybe a Fair Trial on turn 2 to clean up the Drakiri Dissident, which will still manage to deal one damage plus the 2 it swings with, so not bad. Having a back alley in your opening hand is a little bit awkward, as is this Pierce the Storm, given that you're on the draw versus a burn deck. Like, this one of the first cards to come out in a lot of circumstances. But I think we could still see... Oh, non-Ganaxian on your turn. I guess getting the 1 point off of the Suitor of the Seas is kind of free. But Ivy's plan here just has to be answer the entire board, hope you have enough life to work with, and then slam a Iviana or Monument of Queens and just try to end the game as fast as possible. Thankfully, I has Pinecone deals a lot of damage to himself via mana base and via things like Suitor of the Sea, Rikiri Dissident, all of Banished Companion, all these mutual damage effects. Um, but having 2 lands and just this pile of burn spells and the 3rd Suitor of the Sea is really kind of where this deck wants to be. You definitely respond to the Rikiri Dissident, just so you don't take that extra free 1 point. But you'll still take a total of 3 from it, as I mentioned. Having to play out this Monument of Queens as your second land is kind of awkward, given that you really want to be able to Crystal Wave. But I don't think you can afford to take a turn off to back alley. So, we'll see. If Ivy draws a blue or a red source here, that would be kind of the ideal. Um, in general, I think this matchup is hideously favored against Ivy. Grixis is kind of infamous for not having good tools to beat burn, especially Lava Spike oriented builds. Uh, and being on the draw and having this clunky of a hand is really just kind of a nightmare. But I also don't think I would have mulliganed it. You had turn 1 interaction, so I feel like you're kind of priced into it. There's no world in which I want to cast that Prying Inquiry, however. At the very least, not in this stage of the game. You definitely just need to keep the board in check and just kind of keep trudging your way forward. Drawing another Storm Surge here is pretty great, but I think I agree with the decision of just double deploy Suitor of the Sea. There's not really anything that punishes you this way game 1. Ivy's build doesn't have any main deck sweepers. It's all kind of point and click removal. Yeah, and is going to have to play this tapped back alley. I think you do want to Prying Inquiry here as effectively gain 2 life. It's not ideal, but you don't really have other options. And all of these are just interchangeable. Fundamentally, it does not matter which one you pick. Storm Surge is technically the clunkiest, but between Besot, Charm, and Unjust Sentence, it's kind of, yeah, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Unjust Sentence is technically easier to cast, but between the 2 Suitors swinging for 4, plus the 6 bird spells in hand, Ivy's actually dead to the Suitor ticks on her next draw step. Or sorry, on her next upkeep. So, the game's over. We're going through the motions. This was a blazing fast kill. This is a turn 4 kill through, 2 pieces of interaction. 3, I guess, if we're counting the Prying Inquiry. Which, I mean, that's kind of to be expected of burn, especially when burn doesn't flood out. Just the rate in terms of every card representing about a lightning bolt worth of damage is pretty great. And Ivy actually knows that she's dead here. So I believe we will be seeing a very quick game 2. Ivy realizing the checkmate. Alright, so we're going to quickly move to looking at deck list to figure out how sideboard is going to happen. So in Ivy's deck, thankfully Irika helps a little bit in this matchup. It's definitely a Memento Mori and Lucian in, probably also grabbing the Vibrant Rapture, maybe the Violet Collapse since you're on, maybe the Vibrant Rapture since you're on the play. Generally, Violet Collapse is good versus this deck. And you're boarding out, I would probably. I mean, part of the issue is you want to board out a lot of cards this matchup. Unfortunately, you can't board out Nareva because you just need to hit all of your land drops. Um, I probably would want to board out, I think, the Prime Inquiries first. So, -3 of those, +1, +2. And then in terms of the remaining, board wipe spells, I might replace some copies of Pierce the Storm for those. Pierce the Storm, I guess, is kind of a life gain. Maybe you board out Allison Crane. Feels kind of bad to have to board out finishers, though. Pinecone, um, maybe you board in Civ's Cost for more reach. Maybe you board out some slightly slower cards in favor of Forbidden Brew. Actually, I think I want to board out the Curse of Bleedings just because Ivy doesn't have enough life gain for this to be a meaningful card. It's not bad, but I think it's just worse than Forbidden Brew. Um, both players are still sideboarding. It's possible there's a lot more choices to be made here than I'm realizing. In general, if I was in Pinecone's spot, I would want to be more on the burn plan because looking at my opponent's deck, the only access they really have to interact with me is killing my creatures. Um, and although this deck doesn't run that many creatures, it's blue-red burn is definitely the more creature-oriented burn deck in the format. Um, and it has things like Breaks and Sacrilege, which really go the distance versus control decks. Um, you're an aggro deck. You don't want to dilute your game plan too much. Um, so, yeah, I would probably find room for the Forbidden Brews and probably in the spot of Curse of Bleeding. But it's possible you want to instead cut some creatures. Hard to say, especially on the draw. All right, so we're back into game two. Um, both players look like they are in pretty solid hands. Curse of Bleeding stayed in, which, as I mentioned, I don't super agree with. And Pinecone is keeping a one-lander with a 3-drop in hand. So I think this is a little bit risky, especially on a 21 land deck, but it could very well work out. Meanwhile, Ivy is sitting here on 2 1-drop removal spells, a uncastable Planeswalker. Um, oh, so I think what's about to happen is actually a misplay. I really think that Ivy should be finding a red source so she can cast Lucian on curve. I think you just take the 1 damage off of Suitor. Um, yeah, maybe actually you should have led with the Flooded Strand so you didn't have to do this. Yes, you don't get to execute their 1-drop, but you still have the Descend, and this way you can actually cast Lucian on curve. Um, Technically, the upshot here is if if you draw a red source in the top few cards of your library, you're further ahead relative to where you would have been. But yeah, draws another 1-mana removal spell. And here we're seeing kind of the risk of that. Pinecone draws another mana source, which is huge. Doesn't draw another black source. I think that the black-red burn deck is actually a little bit light on black sources. Um, but I think we'll see, turn 2, 6 damage off bolts, turn 3, hopefully another 6 damage off bolts. Will put Ivy down to 7 life, and then it's just a question of does Pinecone draw a black source to either Curse of Bleeding or Reckless Festivities before Ivy's able to stabilize. I don't think this is a decision-making turn. What on earth is this? Do you not realize that all of these spells are sorceries? What are you doing? Oh my god. And the Thought Blossom is huge. Um, Pinecone realizes, realizes what just happened. Jesus Christ, that hurts. And the Suitor of the Sea can just get gobbled up here by a removal spell. Um, oh, assumed had a black source for this Curse of Bleeding? That's really awkward. This Thought Blossom can snag a Scorch. I wouldn't be shocked if it does. Um, you could also save it for like a Reckless Festivities. I'd probably cash it in as a gain 3, especially because then you can cast the Basalt Charm as a kill spell. Um, Not that you want to yet. You definitely want to cast the Descends because those are better into Graveyard. Um, in general, I probably would ask my opponent to pass that over, mark it with a can be cast from exile thing in Cockatrice, just because you don't want to forget that you have a Basalt Charm on deck. Um, and again, we're seeing that turn 1 decision of getting a black source instead of getting a red source coming into play. I really think that was just a little micro decision that's going to make a surprisingly big difference here. I definitely am more interested in playing this on Zen than this Murmuring Falls, Not that it really matters what you do here, is you cast Descend on the Helpless and you pass the turn. Um, but we'll see. Interesting, so you use the Besought Charm as removal, rather than Descends in hand. I wonder what the logic there is. The fact that Besought can go face um, doesn't have a lot of value, but has a non-zero amount of value. Also the decision to play Murmuring Falls instead of Onsen. There's a lot of little decisions here that I don't know, I don't know how much most of them matter, but I also don't know if any of them I agree with. So this is 9 points of burn, so Ivy's about to go down to 9 life. But Pinecone still hasn't found a black source. Um, to those of you thinking, oh, this is just so unlucky, there's currently only 11 black sources in Pinecone's deck, and the Frank Karsten math of that is not particularly favorable. That's, I can cast my black spell on turn, 5, um, which, not great, especially when you're a burn deck that needs to get out the gates really fast. I definitely think that this deck, the fact this deck is only running 2 Lava Torn fields is kind of sus. The fact it's running 1 basic swamp means that 4 of those mountains could just be a Wayfarer Shrine. There's a lot of really small changes you can make that help tremendously. And here's Lucian. I wouldn't say right on time, because now your opponent has had time to draw black mana for Curse of Bleeding. But Lucian, better late than never. If you're a greedy player, you're going to plus Lucian to draw a card here. But given that there's a Lord Allison Crane in your deck, I would recommend not doing that. In general, you're going to hope to just, if your opponent doesn't draw a black source this turn, Brazen Sacrilege will not do it. Okay, so Ivy is now going to be gaining 3 life a turn, which is very good, especially versus a burn deck that's trying to top deck kill you 3 damage at a time. So yeah, if you're Ivy, your burn opponent has 3 lanes of play, draws a card and passes. That means that their hand is either black spells, instants, or more lands. And based on, oh my god, that Xanagan's huge. Holy cow. Because you can Xanagan and plus, you go up to 10, your opponent takes 2. You then Lucian and plus, and you then swing with the Xanagan emblem. It looks like Ivy is not going to be putting any stock into the Xanagan emblem. To be fair, if you're playing Grixis control, you probably don't think a lot about how creature combat is going to work. That's not why you play this sort of deck. I think casting this Brazen Sacrilege now is a little bit impatient. Just give your opponent, your opponent should be operating with as little information as possible. Maybe Ivy didn't want to take damage to cast the Xanagan, but looks, if you're going to take it, you may as well take it before combat where it'll allow you to gain an extra life. So if Ivy loses this game by exactly 1 life, we'll know what really made the difference. Somehow I suspect that's not what this game is going to come down to. 1 life or 1 damage, I suppose. So yeah, Xanagan is going to uptick to 6, bonk Pinecone to 15. Next turn, another uptick will put Pinecone to 13, and then the Lucian with the 2 emblems is going to put Pinecone down to 8. And given that Pinecone just missed on another black source, I think I agree with the assessment that this is game. Too much life is about to be gained on Ivy's side. So yeah, I think the games that Ivy wins look remarkably like that. And I also think that the games that Pinecone loses also look almost exactly like that. Your mana doesn't cooperate. You effectively just pass a turn right there. Just the turn that Pinecone thought that he had access to Curse of Bleeding, but in fact just had access to Scorches. I don't think that game came down to 6 life anywhere at any point, but that would be a mistake on that part if that was the case. Yeah, both these hands are good. Ivy's hand produces a turn 4 Lucian and probably a turn 5 Xanagan, and does so while taking very little damage off mana base, and can kill a turn 1 creature. Pinecone's hand has 2 threats and 9 damage and burn rolled up. The main question is whether Pinecone will go turn 1 Suitor or turn 1 Banished Companion. I personally in this spot would go turn 1 Banished. Does Banished Companion represent more damage? I can't remember if the adage is you should play your haste creatures first or second. I think you should play them first, because when you're on the when you're on the play versus a control deck, we're going to see some Unceasing Flames pick off the Suitor before it gets the chance to stack up much in the way of damage. And we're also going to see then just the Storm Surge plus Banish Companion knock you down to 14 life. And unfortunately for Ivy, there's not much recourse you have to that. I appreciate Pinecone calling that card cool. Unceasing Flames is one of my designs in this format. It was based on... Originally, I was going to design a card based on a card from Eternal TCG, and then Hersey suggested, the design that would eventually become Unceasing Flames. Drawing the 4th land there is a little bit unfortunate. That's not where you want to be as Burn in this matchup. It's not the worst because you do have Brazen Sacrilege, which is kind of flood insurance here. But knocking your opponent down to 14 is good enough that you're not really going to complain. The nuts here for Ivy is drawing a removal spell. That's not it, but I think there's 2 big options here. I think you can either play Seacash this turn, or you can play a tapped Magmatic Torrent this turn. I don't see a lot of value in doing Magmatic Torrent this turn. I think it's better to do it the next turn, because you don't have a 3-drop in hand, and you do have a 2-drop, so you should take advantage of the tempo right here, right now. But I also don't think it really matters. Brazen Sacrilege having no synergy with Unjust Sentence is currently coming up, which is mildly unfortunate. Ooh, interesting. Not going to cast the Unjust Sentence. Drawing the Pierce the Storm is potentially really punishing here. Thought Blossom is actually way more punishing. I hadn't thought of that. Thought Blossom on your Brazen Sacrilege is really obnoxious. I think in Ivy Spot here I grab a blue-black Painland and then play out the Swamp. You definitely want it to be a blue land, and the circumstance in which you need double black are more common than the circumstance where you need red. Looks like Ivy agrees with me. So this Banish Companion is going to end up stacking to deal 6 damage, which is a pretty above average amount of damage for a Banish Companion. But I think there's a good chance Ivy stabilizes here, as long as Pinecone doesn't draw one of his Haymakers. And against this Brazen Sacrilege, I am snapping off this Thought Blossom every single time. Whoa! What? Why? You want to exile that, because then they don't get to flash it back. I guess maybe you're just afraid of something else happening? I don't like that decision. That's not dealing damage. It's not going to matter. But, well, on Ivy's end it doesn't super matter. But Pinecone just wasted that Brazen Sacrilege. I think from here you Crystal Cavern, you Lucian downtick, you gain 1 life. You're at 8. Lucian's at 1, but you don't care if they kill him. Then your next turn you can Zan again and just run them over. I think passing with Pierce the Storm here is a cowardly move that will lose you the game. And it looks like Ivy agrees. Just, get in there. Here's Lucian. He is going to just devour your human warrior whole. Nom 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 nom. Gaining the life is nice, and then now you can just present a lifelink threat. Storm Surge plus Suitor will kill Lucian, but then Lucian's gained 4 life. Then you untap, you slam Xanagan, you kill their Suitor, and you're still in the driver's seat. I don't think that it's a bad play on Pinecone's end. I think it's forced play, but I'll tell you, I would much rather this Storm Surge be getting doubled by a Brazen Sacrilege than what ended up happening with it before. Irika's also a great draw here. I think you just try to control the board with Xanagan. Getting her upticking as soon as possible is pretty tempting. Although, come to think of it, I guess playing Irika and having access to a Pierce the Storm X equals 2 does insulate. Like, you can trade off the Irika, you gain 1 life in the process, and then you're also insulated against, like, a top-decked Reckless Festivities. Playing and cracking the land means that Ivy is going to just slam Xanagan here, though. And I don't disagree with that line. I think there's merit to both of the lines that I described. I'm not sure off the top of my head which is better. I think I'm slightly more inclined to believe in the Xanagan line, but both are pretty serviceable. And I mean, the point of this Grixis control deck is to just, answer threat, answer threat, answer threat, cool, slay my big planeswalker and kill you. Yes. Although, to be fair, and I recognize that a lot of people are unfamiliar with Cockatrice, and new to playing MSEM, but at a Comp REL event, it is actually your responsibility to remember triggers like Suitor of the Sea and Andrakiri Dissonant, but that's a rant for a separate time. As long as both players are okay with the level of casualness isn't quite the right word, but that sort of idea. Um, and drawing the fifth land is probably a death sentence here. I think it's kind of wrong to scoop, because if Pinecone drew Reckless Festivities or Curse of Bleeding, this game isn't over yet, but Xanagan does swing for lethal in 2 turns, so... yeah, I mean, I think after seeing how those games played out, I think Curse of Bleeding is probably better than I was giving it credit for. But I think that the mana situation in this deck was deeply unfortunate. In the future, if you have a MSEM deck and you're worried that the mana doesn't work, feel free to reach out to myself or Hersey, because both of us enjoy helping mana bases become not good. Helping bad mana bases become good. But I'm sure that one line is going to get memed on for the rest of eternity. All right, without further ado, I hope everyone had a fantastic time watching this match. I definitely had a great time commentating on it, and I hope all of you enjoy later footage of Grand Prix Rome, since this is the largest MSEM Grand Prix so far with 44 players.